Hello, and welcome to the movie universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. Today, I'll be talking about Bedknobs and Broomsticks. This has always been one of my favorites made by Disney because it has a little bit of everything that made Disney awesome. It has great music, great dances, and my personal favorite, knights in shining armor. Or I should say, shining armor that moves on its own. But I'll get to that later. This movie is a true classic, starring legendary actress Angela Lansbury. The story starts off that World War II has begun, and in Britain, they're preparing for a possible invasion by the Nazis. And because of this, many of the children are told to live out into the country for their own safety. And there are 3 orphans who haven't been given a home to stay in. So the county appoints Miss Price to take care of them for the time being. At least until they can find them a more suitable place. But what nobody knows is that Miss Price is actually an apprentice witch. She doesn't have all the great abilities that a true witch has, but she definitely has some real good spells, like being able to turn people into rabbits and a traveling spell that can take you anywhere you want to go. Unfortunately, there's one more spell that she needs to learn, and the college had closed down. So she goes to find Professor Brown, the creator of the college. And in order to find him, she has to quickly get there by using the traveling spell. The spell is, of course, used by enchanting a bed knob, and the spell works quite simply. All you have to do is just tell it where you want to go, tap it 3 times, and then turn it to the left. And only the boy could use it because it was his bed knob. And with help from the kids, she does find him. You might recognize Professor Brown because he's played by David Tummelson, better known as the dad from Mary Poppins. Of course, Mr. Brown was not what Miss Price had expected because turns out he was a fraud. And all those spells he gave her, he actually got from an old book. And he had no idea that they were actually real spells that really worked. What are the odds? Seriously, what are the odds of that? But getting back to the story, they get the book and they realize why he had to close the college, because the final page of the book was gone. What was on that page was a very important spell called the substitutionary locomotion spell. And what it would do is it would bring inanimate objects to life. And after going to Portobello Road to see if they could find the final page of the book, where they end up finding the man who has the final page, and they learn that the spell is actually printed on the star of the wizard Astaroth himself. And they learn that what happened was he had animals in cages and searched for spells that would make them be like humans. And in the end, he finally succeeded. And because of what they had went through beforehand, they revolted, killed him, and took a ship and were never seen or heard from again. But there was a final paragraph in the book where a seaman swore on the day he died that he saw an island that was ruled by animals, an island called Nabumbu, which coincidentally was in a little child's story that one of the kids had. So, of course, they go to the island of Nabumbu, where they have a very glorious time under the water at first because they've fallen into the lagoon. That's where we get one of my favorite songs, Bobbing Along. It's a good song. You definitely should look that one up, trust me. After a little fun in the water, they get up on land, and they try to get the star. Of course, for Mr. Brown, he had to try to use all his little trickery to try to get it. And it wasn't easy because there was a big soccer game coming up, and he was the referee. So it took a little doing, and he finally got it. And when they escaped, they realized that the star didn't go with them, but you remember the book that the kid had? Turns out it was in there the whole time. Yeah, so technically they didn't even need to go there. After all their adventures, they decide to go their separate ways. Mr. Brown decides to go his way back to London. Meanwhile, Miss Price decides, with her and the kids, they've gotten to know each other so well that she decided to adopt him. But the Nazis actually invade. Well, okay, it wasn't the real invasion. It was more like a little exercise done by a small regiment to cause a little mischief, to show that they're unstoppable. They can go anywhere they please without any problem at all. That was pretty much the idea. They capture Miss Price and the children, but they fail to capture Mr. Brown. And they lock him up in an old castle filled with all kinds of suits of armor and weapons. And the kids and Mr. Brown had one idea, to use the substitutionary locomotion spell to bring them to life. So she uses it, and all the armor, all the weapons, even the redcoats, come to life. and they chased those Nazis right out of England, but not before destroying Miss Price's house, and because of that, the spell was broken. And because of that, she can never be a witch again. Mr. Brown decides to join the army, and of course, he shows how he feels about Miss Price. And the kids? Well, let's just say not all the spells were destroyed, because they could still do the traveling spell. Because the boy still has the bed knob.
It is truly a great movie, one that I highly recommend everybody sees. But, like any other great movie, it has a few flaws. Like, for instance, there's about 2 or 3 scenes with the local vicar who apparently wants to try to get on Miss Price's good side just so he can have her farm. They make that pretty clear the first time we see him. But he really doesn't have any huge part in it at all. He's more like in the background. In fact, she doesn't even say hardly one word to him at all. So it's like, why did we even bother with this guy? The only purpose he serves is to see Miss Price's nightgown attack him. And that's literally the only good thing we get out of that. Again, he is a very pointless character. His moments are pointless. I don't know why they bothered with him. Apparently, he was in the book that this movie was based off of, and that's why they did it. But since he had so little of a role in it, they should have just cut him out completely. Not to mention when Mr. Brown, Miss Price, and the kids are at the evil bookkeeper's place, if you pay close attention, when they used the bed to escape, they left the magic book behind. So that means the bookkeeper can read it and use the spells to commit any criminal act he feels like. Now, I know a lot of people would think that's a pointless thing to bring up, but think about this for a minute, folks. Miss Price wanted to use the spells to help in the war effort, and if anything, to help England in the long run. Obviously, leaving that book in the hands of a criminal is definitely not going to help England in any way at all. And on top of that, this movie has some pretty odd quirks. Like, for instance, there's a scene that after the Nazis first take over Miss Price's house, Mr. Brown is sleeping in the train station waiting for the next train to come in the morning. And he wakes up to a dream of Miss Price in a circus getup singing a small song, and she disappears, and then he notices the Nazis are cutting the wires on the telegraph line. I get the idea behind it. He was obviously thinking about her, but that was a very pointless dream, and in fact, years ago on television, they never showed that. They just showed him waking up and seeing that the Nazis were cutting the telegraph line. To me, that is way more important than him dreaming about her right at that minute. I mean, sure, it makes sense. He's falling in love with her, but at the same time, look what's happening right now. That's clearly more important than that dream. So that was a really weird moment. And speaking of weird, there's a very weird coincidence that they had to go to the island of Nabumbu to find the Star of Astaroth, right? Well, it turns out that Paul, the youngest boy, actually had a book that he picked up in the children's nursery in the house that Mr. Brown was living in, and by sheer coincidence, it turns out that had the Star of Astaroth in it. And not to mention the fact that the bookkeeper talked about the island of Nabumbu, which is why they went there. So it's really weird that they just happened to go to this place, and just by sheer luck, the magic book and the Book of Nabumbu are in the same location. Try and wrap your head around that one for a minute. And then there's the famous scene of Portobello Road. There is a lot of great stuff going on here, but at the same time, there's also a lot of confusing moments. Like, for instance, you literally have almost everybody around the world dancing. You got sailors, you got GIs, you got Scotsmen, you got Indians, and you got a Caribbean band. I can understand the Scotsmen, and I can understand the Indians because, well, they owned India at that time. But at the same time, I can't help but wonder, all these different people and countries all together in the same place at exactly the same time. And I'm sorry, as much as I love Caribbean music, that really kind of throws me off because, they just kind of come out of nowhere, and I can't help but wonder, what are they doing there? Because World War II was going on, and I don't recall them being a part of it. So, why are they there? Now, those are the only real problems I have with this movie, and they're not much, really. They're just nitpicks. And here's a very interesting fact for you. The song Bobbing Along was actually originally going to be used for Mary Poppins. Yeah, believe it or not, they were actually going to use that song in Mary Poppins because originally they were going to have a scene where she uses a magic compass to take them into an undersea world. But they decided not to go through with that, so instead they used the song here. Pretty cool, huh? There's also a little sad fact about this movie. When they first made it, it ran over 2 hours and 19 minutes. And unfortunately, the movie theater that they presented it to at that time had some kind of dumb tradition of showing a certain film at that time. So they had to chop it up and shorten it. And sadly, they kept it chopped up for well over 2 or 3 decades, until finally, when it came to DVD, they put it all together. Well, almost all of it, because there's still one scene that is long gone, and that's a musical number called Step in the Right Direction, where Miss Price gets her broom and she's talking to the cat about how exciting this is to get her first broom and how learning for the first time is a real step in the right direction. Now, the song is still out there. Unfortunately, the footage was lost. Apparently, it ended up being destroyed. How and why? Nobody knows. But Angela Lansbury remembers it quite well, and there's a lot of still photographs proving that this scene actually existed. And unfortunately, they never tried to recreate that. And it's sad, too, because in this day and age of modern technology, you could get an actor to look like Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, or have an actress look something like Carrie Fisher did when she was younger. So I think if Disney tried, they could recreate this scene and put it into the movie. All they would have to do is get an actress who is the same height and try to recreate the room, and of course with help from Angela Lansbury in the still photographs, just have the actress do the dance scenes and mouth the words, and of course dub in Angela Lansbury's voice. I think it would work. Who knows, maybe someday Disney will try it.
This movie is really great. If you haven't seen it, you should. Believe me, you will not be disappointed. This is Movie Fan, signing off.